February 9th, 2025, Super Bowl Sunday. While millions of Americans gather around televisions to watch the big game, thousands of churches across America will remain empty. Not because of persecution, not because of declining attendance, not because of cultural hostility to Christianity, because pastors decided church should be canceled so members could watch football. This isn't new, it happens every year. But in 2025, the number of churches officially canceling Sunday services for the Super Bowl has reached an all-time high. Over 1,200 churches publicly announced they would not hold services on Super Bowl Sunday, and thousands more quietly scaled back, moved services earlier, or encouraged members to stay home. The justification is always the same. Nobody shows up anyway. We're being realistic. We're meeting people where they are. It's just one Sunday. But what started as pragmatic accommodation has become something far more revealing. Churches canceling Sunday for the Super Bowl isn't just about football. It's a public admission that American Christianity has lost the battle for its members' ultimate allegiance. That entertainment trumps worship. That convenience matters more than commitment. That the church exists to serve its members' preferences rather than call them to something higher. This is the story Christian leaders don't want to examine, honestly, because the Super Bowl Sunday cancellations reveal a crisis that goes far deeper than one day per year. They expose what American Christianity has become and why it's collapsing. The question isn't whether churches should cancel for the Super Bowl. The question is what it means that they feel they have to. Let's start with data that makes denominational leaders deeply uncomfortable. In 2025, over 1,200 churches publicly announced on websites and social media that they would not hold Sunday services on Super Bowl Sunday. This number is documented through church websites, social media posts, and denominational surveys. It represents a 15% increase from 2024 and a 40% increase from 2020. But the real number is much higher. Thousands of additional churches don't officially cancel services. They simply move them earlier in the day, combine multiple services into one morning gathering, or hold abbreviated services that end by noon. These churches technically meet but structure everything around accommodating the Super Bowl. One survey of evangelical pastors conducted in January 2025 found that 38% of churches made some kind of schedule adjustment for Super Bowl Sunday. That's over one-third of evangelical churches in America altering their worship schedule to accommodate a football game. The denominations most likely to cancel or adjust are non-denominational evangelical churches and Baptist congregations. Precisely the traditions that historically emphasized the importance of Sunday worship and criticized mainline denominations for theological compromise. The churches that once condemned worldliness are now canceling worship to watch the world's biggest sporting event. Megachurches lead the trend. Of the 100 largest churches in America, 47 either canceled evening services, moved morning services earlier, or publicly encouraged members to skip church and watch the game. Several prominent megachurch pastors posted on social media telling their congregations it was okay to miss church this week and to enjoy the game with family. The geographic pattern is revealing. Churches in the South, the Bible Belt, are most likely to cancel or adjust for the Super Bowl. Texas, Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas have the highest concentration of Super Bowl Sunday cancellations. The regions that pride themselves on being the heartland of American Christianity are the most willing to accommodate football over worship. But attendance data reveals the underlying problem. Churches that continue holding normal services on Super Bowl Sunday report attendance drops of 30 to 50%. Some churches see their sanctuaries two-thirds empty. Youth groups and evening services are ghost towns. The people who do attend are often older members who don't watch football, meaning the working-age adults and families that churches desperately need are choosing the game over worship. Pastors describe the dilemma. Hold services and preach to empty rooms, or cancel, and at least be honest about where your congregation's priorities lie. Either way, the message is clear. For most American Christians, football matters more than Sunday worship. This creates a crisis every year. Pastors know attendance will be terrible. They know families have already made plans around the game. They know that holding services means investing significant resources, staff time, building costs, childcare workers for a handful of attendees. The pragmatic choice is to cancel. But pragmatism has consequences, and those consequences are now reshaping American Christianity in ways that go far beyond one Sunday in February. When pastors defend canceling church for the Super Bowl, they use remarkably consistent arguments. These justifications reveal how American Christianity thinks about worship, discipleship, and the church's mission. Nobody comes anyway, so why waste resources? This is the most common justification. Pastors argue that holding services when attendance will be abysmal is inefficient. Staff members have to work. Volunteers have to serve. Buildings have to be heated and lit, all for a tiny congregation. Better to cancel, give everyone the day off, and resume normal operations the following week. This argument treats church like a business optimizing for efficiency. When customer traffic is low, you close the store. When demand drops, you cut costs. The logic is pure consumerism applied to worship. If people don't want the product, stop offering it. But worship isn't a product. Church isn't a business. And attendance isn't a metric for whether worship should occur. Historically, Christians gathered for worship because God commanded it, and because worship is the fundamental purpose of God's people, not because enough consumers showed up to make it economically viable. We're meeting people where they are. Pastors frame canceling church as missional flexibility. Modern people have busy lives. They value family time. The Super Bowl is a cultural event that brings families and friends together. Rather than compete with culture, the church should accommodate it. By giving people permission to skip church, pastors claim they're being understanding and realistic about modern life. This justification sounds humble, but reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of the church's calling. Meeting people where they are means going to them with the gospel, not capitulating to their preferences. Jesus met people where they were and then called them to follow him, which required leaving where they were. The early church met people in their cultural context but demanded they repent and reorder their lives around Christ. Canceling church to accommodate football isn't meeting people where they are. It's affirming that where they are, prioritizing entertainment over worship is perfectly fine. It's just one Sunday. Pastors minimize the significance by emphasizing it's only one day per year. Missing one worship service out of 52 isn't a big deal. People miss church for vacations, sickness, work, and family obligations all the time. The Super Bowl is just another reason to miss, and not worth fighting about. This argument ignores that symbols matter and precedents compound. When the church officially declares that football is more important than worship, even for one Sunday, it communicates a hierarchy of values. Entertainment ranks above obedience. Cultural participation ranks above spiritual discipline. Convenience ranks above commitment. And the precedent expands. If it's acceptable to cancel church for the Super Bowl, why not for other cultural events? Some churches now cancel for the NCAA championship game. Others adjust for major concerts or community festivals. Once you establish that church can be canceled when something better is happening, you've lost any grounds to insist on weekly worship as non-negotiable. We can worship the game together. Some churches reframe the cancellation as missional opportunity. They organize Super Bowl watch parties, encouraging members to invite non-Christian friends. They argue that sharing the game with others in Christian community is a form of worship and witness. The Super Bowl becomes evangelistic opportunity rather than worship competition. This justification is creative but dishonest. Watching football together is not worship in any biblical sense. Hospitality and friendship with non-believers is valuable, but it doesn't replace corporate worship. And rebranding entertainment as evangelism is precisely the kind of theological compromise that empties words of meaning. The reality is simpler than the justifications suggest. Churches cancel Sunday for the Super Bowl because members want to watch football more than they want to worship God. And pastors, rather than challenging that priority, accommodate it. The Super Bowl Sunday cancellations are symptoms of a deeper disease in American Christianity. They reveal how thoroughly the church has been captured by consumerism, pragmatism, and the belief that Christianity exists to serve its members rather than the other way around. First, American Christianity operates on consumer principles. Churches that cancel for the Super Bowl treat members as customers whose preferences must be satisfied. If customers don't want Sunday services because football is more appealing, you adjust your product offering. You don't demand loyalty, you compete for attention. This represents a fundamental departure from historic Christianity. The early church didn't ask whether worship was convenient or preferable to other activities. Believers gathered because they were commanded to and because worship was their primary purpose as God's people. Persecution, inconvenience, and danger didn't justify missing. They required greater commitment. Modern American Christianity has inverted this. We ask what people want and build church around their preferences. And when those preferences include watching football instead of worshiping, we cancel worship. Second, American Christianity has lost the category of sacred obligation. Previous generations of Christians understood that certain things were non-negotiable simply because God commanded them. Worship on the Lord's Day was sacred obligation regardless of convenience or preference. You went to church not because you felt like it, but because Christians gather to worship. Modern Christianity has replaced sacred obligation with personal choice. Everything is negotiable. Everything depends on how you feel, what works for you, and whether it fits your schedule. There are no commands, only suggestions, no obligations, only options. The Super Bowl cancellations reveal how completely this shift has occurred. Pastors can't even appeal to the sacredness of Sunday worship because their congregations don't recognize sacred obligations. Everything, including worship, is subject to personal preference. American Christianity has embraced pragmatism over principle. The justifications for canceling church are all pragmatic. It's inefficient to hold services nobody attends. It's realistic to acknowledge people prioritize football. It's smart to avoid competing with culture for people's time. But Christianity isn't primarily pragmatic. It's principled. Actions matter because of what they represent and what they form in us, not just because of practical outcomes. Gathering for worship, even when it's inconvenient forms, people who value obedience over convenience. Holding services, even when attendance is low, declares that worship matters regardless of numbers. Canceling church because its pragmatic forms, people who believe principles, can be abandoned when they become inconvenient. And once that pattern is established, no principle is secure. American Christianity has made peace with mediocrity. The Super Bowl cancellations represent surrender. Pastors have given up trying to form believers who prioritize worship over entertainment. They've accepted that church will always lose when competing with more appealing options. They've embraced their role as providing religious services to consumers rather than forming disciples. This surrender is spiritual death. If the church can't inspire greater loyalty than football, it has nothing to offer. If Christianity can't produce believers who will miss the Super Bowl to worship God, it's not forming disciples. It's providing religious entertainment to people who consume it when convenient. American Christianity has forgotten that worship forms us. The decision to skip church for the Super Bowl isn't neutral. It forms you. It teaches you that entertainment matters more than obedience, that comfort matters more than commitment, that worship is optional when something better is available. Do this repeatedly. Skip church for the Super Bowl, then for vacations, then for kids' sports, then because you're tired, and you form a person for whom Christianity is peripheral, a consumer of religious products rather than a disciple of Jesus. Churches that cancel worship for football are participating in forming consumers. They're teaching their members that church exists to accommodate their preferences rather than call them to something higher. To understand how far American Christianity has fallen, you need to see what earlier generations believed about Sunday worship. The early church met weekly on Sunday, the Lord's Day, to commemorate Jesus' resurrection. This wasn't optional or negotiable. Christians gathered regardless of persecution, inconvenience, or competing priorities. Roman authorities knew that to find Christians, you simply watched who gathered for worship on Sunday mornings. The Reformers emphasized the importance of weekly corporate worship. Calvin wrote that Christians are commanded to gather for worship and that neglecting this command demonstrates contempt for God. Luther argued that hearing the word preached was essential for faith and that missing worship endangered the soul. American Christians in the 18th and 19th centuries viewed Sunday worship as sacred obligation. Blue laws prohibited commerce and entertainment on Sundays, specifically to preserve the day for worship and rest. Communities centered around Sunday church attendance. Missing worship was scandalous, a public statement of spiritual negligence. Even in the early 20th century, evangelical Christians maintained strong commitments to Sunday worship. Billy Graham insisted that new converts immediately join churches and attend weekly. Church membership included expectations of regular attendance. Missing worship required explanation and was considered serious spiritual concern. This commitment lasted into the 1970s and 80s. Churches were full on Sunday mornings and evenings. Wednesday night services were standard. Christians organized their lives around worship rather than expecting worship to accommodate their lives. The collapse happened remarkably quickly. By the 1990s, churches began competing with culture for attendance. Seeker-sensitive models prioritized making church appealing to unchurched consumers. The language shifted from obligation to invitation, from command to option, from worship as duty to worship as experience. By the 2000s, churches were canceling Sunday evening services because attendance was low. By the 2010s, Wednesday nights had disappeared in most churches, and by the 2020s, churches were canceling Sunday morning, the most sacred service of the Christian week, for a football game. The trajectory is clear. Once you accept that worship is optional and should accommodate people's preferences, there's no stopping point. Every compromise leads to the next. Every accommodation trains people to expect more accommodation. And now we've reached the logical conclusion. Church can be canceled for entertainment because we've taught people that church exists to serve them rather than call them to serve God. So what should churches do about Super Bowl Sunday? The answer reveals what kind of Christianity they're trying to form. Option 1. Hold normal services and preach to whoever comes. This is the principled approach. Church happens on Sunday because that's when Christians gather to worship. Attendance is irrelevant. Cultural events are irrelevant. You hold services because worship is what the church does, and you trust that the people who prioritize worship will attend. This approach will mean small crowds. It will mean preaching to empty sanctuaries. It will mean volunteers serving when they'd rather be home. It will feel inefficient and discouraging. But it also makes a statement. Worship matters regardless of convenience. The church doesn't exist to compete with culture, but to call people out of culture into something higher. And the handful of people who choose worship over football are being formed into disciples who value obedience over entertainment. Churches that take this approach should celebrate it. Preach your best sermon to 50 people. Worship with joy even when the sanctuary is empty. Thank the people who came for demonstrating what discipleship looks like, and refuse to apologize for holding church when culture offers something more appealing. Use Super Bowl Sunday to teach about priorities and discipleship. Some churches hold normal services but specifically address the Super Bowl. They preach about idolatry, how entertainment becomes a god when it displaces worship. They teach about discipleship, how following Jesus means choosing obedience over convenience. They challenge members to examine their priorities and consider what their choices reveal about their ultimate commitments. This approach is confrontational but necessary. If Christians are choosing football over worship, they need to be challenged about what that means. If the Super Bowl matters more than Sunday services, pastors need to name that as spiritual problem rather than accommodate it. This will offend people. Some members will leave. Others will complain that church is being judgmental or legalistic. But churches that refuse to challenge their members' idolatries aren't making disciples. They're managing consumers. Some churches hold abbreviated morning services and then organize Super Bowl watch parties. Members worship first, then gather for the game. This approach honors both worship and community, teaching that cultural participation is fine as long as worship remains primary. This is a reasonable middle ground if it's done honestly. The danger is that abbreviated services become token worship designed to get people out quickly so they can watch football. If worship becomes something to endure before the real event, you've still communicated that entertainment matters more than God. But if churches genuinely prioritize worship, holding full services, preaching substantive sermons, taking time for prayer and communion, and then gather afterward for fellowship around the game, they model healthy priorities. Worship comes first. Community matters. And cultural events can be enjoyed without becoming idols. What churches should not do: cancel worship entirely. This communicates that church is optional when something better is available. It forms consumers, not disciples, and it represents surrender to cultural priorities. Rebrand entertainment as worship. Calling a Super Bowl party missional gathering or worship through community is theological dishonesty. Watching football isn't worship. Don't pretend otherwise. Apologize for holding church. Some pastors defensively explain why they're still having services on Super Bowl Sunday as if they need to justify not canceling. This communicates that holding worship is unusual rather than normal. Churches should never apologize for gathering to worship God. The Super Bowl is just the most visible example of a larger pattern. Churches across America are canceling or adjusting worship for all kinds of reasons, each justified pragmatically but collectively revealing the church's surrender to cultural priorities. Churches cancel or adjust for NCAA championship games, major concerts or festivals, holiday weekends, Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, school spring breaks, community events, beautiful weather. Everyone will be at the beach anyway. Each cancellation is justified the same way. Attendance will be low, people have other priorities, it's inefficient to hold services, nobody attends. And each cancellation further normalizes the idea that worship is optional when life offers something more appealing. Some churches have stopped holding Sunday evening services permanently. Others canceled Wednesday night services. Many reduced their worship schedules to one Sunday morning service instead of multiple services throughout the week. The trajectory is always the same: reduce expectations, accommodate preferences, and call it being realistic or missional. But what's actually happening is that churches are training their members to view Christianity as one option among many rather than as the organizing principle of their entire lives. And the result is predictable. Churches that cancel worship for convenience produce members who view worship as convenient activity. Those members then expect the church to accommodate their schedules, preferences, and priorities. When the church can't compete with more appealing options, they leave for churches that will accommodate more, or they leave church entirely. The Super Bowl cancellations are symptoms of terminal disease. American Christianity is dying not because of cultural hostility or secularization, but because we've formed consumers instead of disciples, and consumers abandon products that don't satisfy their preferences. Churches canceling Sunday for the Super Bowl isn't really about football. It's about what American Christianity has become and where it's heading. We've built a Christianity that exists to serve its members rather than call them to serve God. We've made worship optional and negotiable. We've prioritized convenience over commitment, preference over obedience, and pragmatism over principle. And we've trained generations of believers to view faith as consumer choice rather than sacred obligation. The Super Bowl cancellations reveal the logical end of this trajectory. If worship can be canceled when football is more appealing, then worship doesn't actually matter. If church exists to accommodate members' preferences, then it will always lose to better options. And if Christianity can't inspire greater loyalty than entertainment, it has nothing to offer that can't be found elsewhere. The crisis isn't that churches cancel for the Super Bowl. The crisis is that they feel they have to, that their members won't come otherwise, that worship can't compete with entertainment, that Christianity has become so weak, so compromised, so consumer-oriented that a football game can shut down thousands of churches across America. This didn't happen overnight. It's the result of decades of accommodation, compromise, and pragmatism, of lowering expectations and reducing demands, of treating members as customers and worship as product, of forgetting that the church exists to form disciples who follow Jesus regardless of cost, inconvenience, or competing priorities. The solution isn't complicated. Churches need to recover the category of sacred obligation. They need to teach that worship matters because God commands it, not because people prefer it. They need to hold services regardless of attendance and refuse to apologize for calling members to prioritize obedience over entertainment. This will be costly. People will leave. Attendance will drop. Offerings will decrease. Pastors will face criticism for being inflexible and unrealistic. But the alternative is worse, continuing to form consumers who abandon Christianity the moment something more appealing comes along. The question every church must answer is, what are we forming? Disciples who worship God regardless of competing priorities, or consumers who attend when convenient and skip when something better is available? The Super Bowl cancellations reveal that most American churches have chosen to form consumers, and consumers are why the church is dying. But it doesn't have to be this way. Churches can choose differently. They can hold worship on Super Bowl Sunday and every Sunday. They can teach that obedience matters more than convenience. They can form disciples instead of managing consumers. The game will be over in a few hours. The question is whether the church will still be standing when it ends. If this investigation matters to you, if you want to understand why American Christianity is collapsing from within, subscribe to Christian Faith Archive. We investigate the institutional compromises, cultural capitulations, and theological failures that most churches won't acknowledge. Because churches canceling Sunday for football is just one symptom. The disease is much deeper, and until we're willing to diagnose it honestly, the patient will keep declining. The Super Bowl will be played whether churches meet or not, but what we're building, disciples or consumers, will determine whether the church survives the next generation.